Colin actually changed his title, so he provide a Humean challenge to predictive coding.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the old title was clever, and I realized it didn't fit on here, so I didn't want to standard philosophy title. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks especially to Alex and Richard for the last talk today. Like, they deserve special thanks. It's been a really fantastic conference. So, and let me know if I start blowing out people's ears because I'm used to shouting when I get close. So, as we've seen today, through the last 3 days, we've been talking about predictive coding, where the general idea is the brain is something like a mechanism for updating mechanistic models of the world via minimizing prediction error. I say I'm going to be critical of this, but I want to note, one of the things that's been really interesting at the conference for me has been this discussion of the status of this claim, whether it's supposed to be more like an idealization, whether it's supposed to be something more like a theory. I think one thing that I do want to emphasize, I think as a modeling strategy, it's been very successful. There have been very interesting things that have come out of it. So I have lots of friends who are predictive coders. One of my attorneys is a predictive coder. And I don't know if this has come up because I did some talks yesterday, but so this has been going around the interwebs, this GIF. And people claim, the discussion has been, some people claim they can hear it, so they can hear a thud when it lands. And there's lots of discussion of people saying, oh, maybe it's your heartbeat, maybe it's the tension. There's a lot of nice people saying, no, there's this predictive coding theory. Look, you expect certain things to happen, and so you have an expectation of something about the sound and so on. It's nice, to account for a lot of things. What I'm going to take issue with today is this kind of stop clause at the end. So it's not just that we make predictive models and minimize predictive errors, but that's all we do. So this is the kind of grand unified version of predictive coding. And I'm partly interested, I should say, I have something of a personal history, other work on pain and pain perception, homeostatic sensations, which is linked to motivation rather than representation, or that's my argument. But I'm going to try to take a broader tack on this today, and sound more like a philosopher. So in philosophy, there's a background position that comes up in a lot of different realms in philosophy of mind, especially in kind of ethics and moral psychology called Humeanism, which is basically inspired by Hume. And the idea is that you've got something like beliefs and desires are two distinct kinds of state. They have two distinct directions of fit. You need both of them to act, and there aren't necessary connections between the two. Beliefs are the things that tell you about the world. Desires are the things that you try to make the world fit to you, and they're separate. Now, there are lots of people who tell this, and I'm going to talk about David Lewis's version, particularly an argument that comes from David Lewis later on. So it goes on through, and he says the important bit from this, desires are contingent, you can have unusual ones, but there are no necessary connections between desire and belief, or any values can go with any credence, at least in theory. And we've heard a lot about Bayesianism over the past 3 days, but typically, Bayesianism is typically presented as an epistemology. It's something about how you update your credences. And on a lot of counts, that's half the story, right? So you also need a value function, here represented by von Neumann. And so it's your credences and your values together that give you action. And the general challenge seems to be that action is governed by two distinct parameters. So you and I can believe exactly the same things but do different things just because we want different things and vice versa. So a good theory seems like it needs to accommodate that, and typically it needs to accommodate that by building in two distinct types of states. So I think the sexy thing about predictive coding, one of the many sexy things, aside from its proponents, is supposed to be that it erases any fundamental computational line between perception and control of action. This is Andy. So that you've just got one type of state, this sort of prediction state, and that's going to do all of the work for you. And if true, that's cool, right? You can get kind of Occam's razor argument there. It's better to do more with less. But that's going to be the kind of target of this is. So the big picture thing is going to be that this probably doesn't work, and if it works, it doesn't work in an easy way. There. So, but to motivate this problem, and in the background, there's something sometimes called the dark room problem, but I think that has some misleading features. So instead, I'm going to turn to the seminal 1993 Aerosmith video for, even it'll do the sound too, for Living on the Edge. We think, oh no, guitar string fairy, you're about to get hit by a train. What are you going to do? What's he going to do? Ah, he steps off just at the last minute. I continue rocking out. Now, the question is why? Not in some broad sense. But why does he step out in front of the train? Well, the Humean has an answer, right? He believes that the train's going to hit him. He desires to live, or at least desires to continue walking. So if you've got a belief desire model, that's fine. If you're a predictive coder, on the other hand, it seems like you've got this one, right? It's very easy to predict what's going to happen when a train comes at you. It gets closer and closer and closer. It's on track, so it doesn't do anything, dramatic. It gets close and close, and then it hits you and you die. Now that seems like something that you can predict pretty well. And in fact, a lot of bad states you can predict pretty well that they're going to happen. So if the brain is just an engine for prediction, it seems like, why should you do things? Certainly, why should you do adaptive actions, but really, why should you do anything? So in standard presentations, this is sometimes called the dark room problem, because it seems like if you crawl in a dark room and die, Regina talked about this, you starve to death and die, that's pretty easy to predict, much easier to minimize prediction error than walking around the world. So that's going to be the challenge. And here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to give what I take to be the kind of standard predictive coding answer to this. Then I'm going to go through some of the details and give counterexamples to proposals. Some of this follows, Richard talked about this a bit yesterday. I've got a paper that's forthcoming in Synthesa that goes through this in more detail, so this will just be a quick tour. What I'd like to do then is actually generalize it. So go back to Lewis actually has a Humean argument against collapsing desires into belief. And so I'm going to try to show that that applies in the predictive coding case. And I'll go through a trilemma and say, what can the predictive coder say in response? All right. So I take it in kind of a two-step solution about how this is supposed to work, about how you're going to get something like desires back into predictive coding. So the first step is you've got this great line handy that motor control is just more top-down sensory prediction. So you've got sensory input going up. And eventually, at some point, that shades into motor commands, which change your sensory input. And the important thing is, if you've got prediction error, there are kind of two ways to eliminate prediction error. One is to update your model, and the other is to update or to change your sensory input by doing things. So there's a lot of different ways to accommodate. Now, that alone is not enough to get you adaptive action, because there are things that work like this. So the standard homing missile, which also does things like minimize prediction error. And of course, it does so precisely so that it can blow up and be destroyed. So just minimizing prediction error itself doesn't guarantee that you're going to do adaptive action, because in some sense, the missile does that, and if it's successful, it blows up. So what you want to do, and this is the second step I take it, here are some quotes from other people, is you build in the right kind of prior beliefs. So this is, for example, Hoey says, the creature needs to be endowed with priors that tie to its expected states, blah, blah, blah. And it has expectations that are defining of the creature because they tell it its expected states and thereby its phenotype. Where Neil Seth has this, which talks about, again, in the case of homeostatic regulation, the idea is something like, the good state is also the typical state. So, states where you're thirsty or so thirsty you're about to die, you should expect not to be in those states. And by expecting not to be in them, you drive your action back to, or that drives enough action to get you back to the right state. So you build those in, and the key insight is going to be that organisms expect to do certain useful things. If they're not doing those things, then there's a mismatch between the actual state that drives adaptive action. So that, there are various ways to cash this out that I'll go into, but that's supposed to be the kind of general picture about how you do things. So we put those expectancies in there. Now good. So might give the sort of general translation principle very roughly. I say the predictive coder says anytime the Humean says, look, I'm going to say, right, desire that X or I desire that not X, you can replace this with something like, it's likely that I do X or I expect to do X, or it would be very surprising not to do X. And that second one is a very credency type of thing. It looks like other kinds of belief. So you reduce everything down to that one kind of state. So the general question is going to be whether this general translation principle is going to be enough. Now, one thing I should note, and just to drive some of the subsequent discussion, in terms of likely and unlikely, a lot of this is going to have to be relative to a reference class. So some like going through different options, it's just going to be what reference class you're using in order to fix that likely, unlikely. So I think that's the general line. Variants of this show up in a lot of different places. And so now I want to talk a bit about ways in which at least some of the extant versions don't work. So first, a kind of general thing that I think is worth keeping in mind on all of this. Andy puts in pauses to breathe, I put in pauses for existential contemplation. The one thing that's extremely likely that we can all expect with near probability 1 is that we will die. So it can't be that the very likely state, or the likely states are also the good ones, assuming you think that is bad. So we'll think through some of this sort of more in detail. So the general criticism is going to be that, in fact, it's very easy to find cases where, although in limit cases, the desirable and typical line up and negations, in general, the desirable can't be identified with the typical, and the undesirable can't be identified with the atypical. So, first warm-up thing, I don't know if anyone actually suggests this explicitly, but one thing might be, take the reference class as your actual history. So I'd say maybe the likely states, the ones I'm supposed to get, are the ones that I've actually encountered in my life. Well, that can't be right. So on the left we've got a camel. He lives a hard life in the outback. He's always kind of thirsty. He's always kind of hungry. So his typical state is to be thirsty and hungry. But that's not a reason not to eat and drink if he finds food and water. Right? So it seems like the good thing for the camel, especially drinking his fill, is going to be a relatively atypical one. Or take our spawning salmon, and I think this is a really good one. So look, the salmon spend all this energy to go upstream and spawn and die. Now, in some sense, they're going upstream and spawning and dying is exactly as unexpected and unique a life event as it would be for Joe Perry to be hit by a train. Nevertheless, it seems like salmon have quite a strong drive to do that, even though, in terms of their actual life history, it's very atypical. So it can't just be that, the actual typicality or atypicality of something in our lives is a good guide to whether or not we ought to do it. Which is why, so you think the salmon, you say, okay, well look, if you're a salmon, it shouldn't just be that it's typical for you to do it, because of course you only get to do it once, but maybe it's something like things like you. So maybe the reference is the states of your conspecifics. And this is what a lot of people say, something like this. So for example, there's Jacob, I think I actually quoted that before, and this is, these expectations, this bit again, are defining of the creature because they tell it its expected states, and thereby its phenotype. So take it, if you read phenotype as picking up something wider, so now, it is expected, let's say, that the salmon, that salmon will, but you have to phrase this carefully, because the mismatch always has to be with your own states. So what fixes the expectations is the general class of salmon, but you still have an expectation, if you're salmon, that you're going to go swim upstream and die. That's a little bit better, but there are still a bunch of counterexamples. So one, which I think I learned from something from Paul Griffiths a long time ago, first of all, there are lots of things where the expected state of any particular organism is bad. So most acorns fall to the ground and rot and die. That's the expected state for an acorn, but obviously not the one that anything should strive for. And similarly, these fish that spawn out tons and tons of them, and most of them get eaten. The expected state for a juvenile fry is to be eaten, but obviously they don't try to do that. Similarly, most male elephant seals never mate. One of these organizations where there's a big bull and it does most of the mating, but that's not a reason for elephant seals to give up on mating. There's also a problem which runs through this that that kind of pops back up, which is what you do once you move from your actual life history to anything like conspecifics or anything more general. There's a problem about what you do if you're atypical. So for example, if it turns out that you're lactose intolerant, it's true that most people like you, drink milk, but that's not a good reason for you to drink milk. So, can't be that. Just one more example, maybe what you want is not, the reference class is not your actual conspecifics. Maybe it's something like the successful conspecifics. Maybe it's the good one. So this is getting, I think that's some friston on there, but the idea would be, look, you don't look to the fish that got eaten, you look to the fish that didn't get eaten, the successful ones, the ones that went on to breed. So, I think that ends up a little bit better, but there are some more interesting counterexamples here. So one, even the successful conspecifics in the past, suppose you're in the money box, or this may not be an Australian thing. For a while, like, there were these game shows in the US or radio stations would do this where you'd get in a box and money would be going around and you had like 30 seconds to grab as much as you can. That might become a metaphor for capitalism or something. So, you know, it may be that none of the successful conspecifics in the past ever got in the money box. It seems pretty clear that you should grab a bunch of money, but it seems like, you know, they never got in the money box, so it's just undefined what the successful conspecific has done in the past. Similarly, suppose you find yourself out in the cold without a shirt. Well, maybe the successful conspecifics weren't dumb enough to do that, right? So it's not bad state. There are states that you have to already be kind of suboptimal to get into. You don't have a defined expectation. And there's also problems. This shows up actually. It was inspired by this some work by Michael Smith in ethics on ideal agent theories. But the idea is, suppose you're one of the puny seals. The question is, what should you do? Well, the successful seals in the past, like you, have all made it. But that doesn't mean you should try to mate. You certainly shouldn't march into the bull's den and, you know, find the homeliest seal and go for it. Because that will get you beaten up, right? So what you ought to do is often, so I assume what they should do is kind of skulk around whatever seals do and around the edges. So what you should do is often not what the best example of something like you should do if you're not actually the best example. So Michael Smith has a great paper about this where, you know, what should you do? You know, you say, look, you lose a tennis match and you know you're very angry. The ideal person says you should shake hands and be sporting, but you know that you would punch the guy. Well, so you shouldn't do what the ideal agent does. You should walk away, even though it's kind of unsporting, because that's better than punching someone. So there are variations on this. In the paper I go through more. Part of the problem I want to emphasize is that a lot of these formulations, for reasons I don't quite understand, have this frequentist bent to it. This is strongest in the kind of Friston-derived ones. But they all try to find some kind of actual frequencies, either in the present environment or in the past, and use those to fix the priors. So part of the problem, this came up some, for example, in some of the exchanges with Paul and Andy. Part of the problem is that this frequentism stuff, you really want to be a Bayesian. The best thing you should do, this is a really nice paper by Feldman about Bayesian epistemology. This is, you know, from an evolutionary point of view, the best prior is the one that maximizes adaptive fitness, not one that happens to agree with the relative frequencies of the environment. So, however you build in the priors, it looks like you're not going to get, you know, the guidance can't be in terms of what's typical. If guidance can't be in terms of what's typical, then it starts getting harder to motivate this general strategy because we think what's actually typical is not the sort of thing that's adaptive. So, all right, so that's the general problem. I want to expand back out now, and I want to talk about sort of more general argument in favor of Humeanism. And this is trying to adapt an argument from David Lewis. So, first, I'm going to start with what I hope is going to be a plausible triad here. And this is supposed to be things that most predictive coders are committed to, but in some sense lots of us ought to be committed to. So first should be that we distinguish what we want from what is the case. Seems to be pretty obviously true. We should also be able to update our credences in response to evidence. And when we update, we ought to update by conditionalization. That would be good Bayesians. So you take those three, and then Lewis is going to say, look, if you have those three, this is my reconstruction, and you try to reduce desire to belief or value to credence, you run into some pretty insuperable problems. So here's the argument. Sometimes I feel bad about putting mathy stuff, but there's been more math, so it's all right. So a bit of setup would take, you have a value function and a credence function, so the standard setup. And then there's a thesis, which Lewis calls the desire as belief model. What we call it, which calls us, look, there's a halo function, which takes you from proposition A to A halo, such that for anything that you value, your valuing of A is equal to your credence in A halo. All right, so this is just a way to take you from, so for example, the value of stepping away from the train is the halo function might take you to something like the credence that things like me step away from trains in situations like this. The advantage of doing this kind of level of generality is hopefully the argument is going to be whatever you want that halo function to be, it can't be. So whatever you want to plug in for the halo function isn't going to work. So second step, just a general thing, because this is supposed to be a general model. It's not just contingently true that flip these around. So desirous belief. So it's not just that it happens to be true of you now, but it ought to hold that for updating on evidence, regardless of what evidence you have. Given that, then you can show pretty quickly that desirous belief is equivalent to a conjunction of these two theses. So the first one, desirous conditional belief, says that the value of A is equal to the credence of A, halo conditional on A. That's just another way of saying that it ought to hold after updating. And independence, which is basically our first one, that says your credence in A halo conditional on A should be equal to your credence in A halo. In other words, that in some sense, whatever the A halo function is getting you, the value of something ought to be kind of independent of whether or not it's actually the case. So, and then the claim is going to be, all of this, I'm going to slide around a bit, but in general, to independence here, this doesn't generally hold. It's Lewis's claim, and I'm going to contend that it's also especially problematic for various versions of predictive code that want to do anything like fix the halo function in terms of typicality. So, first, there's just a general problem, which many people point out, all discussions start with this, that assuming A halo and A are distinct propositions, this just doesn't hold. Like, updating doesn't work that way. So, very simple counterexamples. If you've got an A and a halo that are greater than 0, you conditionalize on it's not the case that both, then the conditional probability becomes 0, but the unconditional credence on A is greater than 0. Right? The math just doesn't work out that way. There are various ways to do it. Lewis actually does it some other ways. So that doesn't work. I think there are some more interesting problems as well. So there's a nice discussion, Pettit and Hayek have a nice discussion about this, about whether part of the problem is the scope that the A halo function takes, and whether it's supposed to be kind of overall agents, whether each agent gets their own A halo function. But I think there's kind of interesting stuff around here with indexical values. So take situations that have happened in my life. I need to buy a car, I go to a lot, there are a bunch of identical looking cars. I don't care that much about the differences between them. Or I need to buy a wedding ring, and I don't know, they're all rings, I haven't thought about this very much. So, for many of these, the value of any particular car might be quite low. The value of having a car as mine, so this car versus that one, might be quite low, but the value of it, having it as mine, conditional on that it is mine, might be quite high. Right, so there's some problem with sort of self-locating values here. The idea is that sometimes this independence assumption doesn't end up. I think the two that are more specific, so there's something that Andy mentioned the other day, it suggested that wanting something a lot seems to be equivalent to really expecting that it's going to happen. But actually, there's pretty good reasons not to identify that, and it's clearest if you have rated values. So it's very often the case, so suppose you're trying to figure out whether you should pay to get into the money box, and the expectation is that trying to figure out whether you're going to get more money in the long run. You might have some function like this. You might think it's very likely that you'll get low amounts of money, but the very high amounts of money are increasingly less likely. Lots of things work like that, so lots of things have this functional form. But that means that increasingly more valuable states are often increasingly less likely. And in fact, if you think that the more valuable states are more likely, or you expect them more strongly, then you will very quickly be screwed and end up one of these kind of, bad examples in the Bayes book, where it's very easy to get lots of money out of it. So, and it's very hard, the general problem here is, if you've got these two parameters, they're free to vary in ways that look like this, it's very hard to see how you can collapse that down into one axis of value in a dissatisfying way. And then the final problem, in this instance, I feel like this is a persistent problem in the background. So, if A halo is supposed to be anything about typicality, and it's framed in terms of me, then you have to have this consequence that a halo says we can't update facts about value given our experience, which is a bit weird. It means you can't learn things. It's also, I think, necessary. So again, go back to being hit by a train. One of the persistent problems in this, and I'll talk about the solution briefly, or what's supposed to be the solution, is that, so suppose we've got Joe Perry there and he says, look, I'm not the sort of thing that gets hit by a train, right? So that's supposed to be the thing that's driving action. Well, for all we've said, he thinks, well, I'm not the sort of thing that's going to get hit by a train. But I guess I was wrong about that because I'm about to get hit by a train. In fact, I've got pretty high precision on that. I'm about to get hit by a train because the train's right there. It's coming right at me. But of course, if you update that belief about that it becomes typical that you're about to get hit by a train because indeed you're about to get hit by a train, in which case it doesn't actually motivate you to do the thing that you're doing. So, now if you postulate independence, you don't get to do that, or you don't have that problem, but it's very hard to see how this actually works and then how you end up learning anything new. And I think one way to put the kind of less abstractly, the tension that runs through a lot of this is you take these kinds of beliefs. On the one hand, if the expectations given to you by evolution are supposed to be the sort of things that are very fixed to keep you from just updating so that you get hit by a train after all, then you can't learn about new good opportunities in the environment. And conversely, if you can update and learn that there are new good things to do, then it's unclear why you shouldn't update even in cases where there are bad things, because again, we don't have valence in there, we just have stuff about typicality. So that's the shape of the argument, and then to conclude, this might be faster than I thought, or I'm talking fast, I'll go slow. I get excited. So here are the three things that we started with. And I think, okay, these all seemed decent. What can we give up? So say one thing we would give up is like predictive coding and grand unified norm. Okay, you don't want to do that. Which one of these can you give up? Well, let's go through the options. So the first one would be, since this seems to be just generalized, it seems to be in some sense in the spirit of predictive coding, would be that we distinguish what we want from what is actually the case. Now, that's sometimes put, and there's a paper I found recently, I think it's the Napoleon Hill theory of desire. So this is the American author that wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich. It's one of these where you visualize your riches, and that's what drives you to get riches. So I think, less facetiously, so this nice Vanya Misa in Arcannus very recently has this paper about action being enabled by systematic misrepresentations. That's very much in this line. And I think this is the picture sometimes that's presented. So loosely speaking, this is about how motor representations drive action. It entails a suspension of disbelief in the evidence for an absence of movement. In other words, we attend away from evidence they were not moving in order to enable our predictions to be fulfilled. So, I think this is my unhappy pull-up. I think this is a non-starter, though, ultimately. So, for one, I take this from Wolfgang Schwartz. I wish I'd actually published this anywhere other than online, where he refers to it as something like the hallucination theory. So, because part of the problem is, at least on models like Yakub's, the content of perceptual experience is supposed to be identified as the best current model of the environment. But if your best current model of the environment is the one where, so say I want pizza, and what I've got to do to get pizza is suspend the evidence against the fact that I don't already have pizza and figure this out, then it seems like the claim is, if I want a slice of pizza, what I do is I hallucinate a slice of pizza until the world matches up with it. And that doesn't happen. So that seems wrong. More generally, it seems like there are lots of good reasons to keep representations of how the world actually is, and also the goal state in there, so that your forward model works right. So it does seem like on most of the computational models that I've seen, you do actually want to have both your goal state and what's going on in order that you can compare them. So if you literally don't distinguish these, it becomes hard to see how you can get effective action in an effective time. So, another possibility, people don't put it quite this way, would be you could give up on updating your credences. In particular, not all of them, because that would be really bizarre. But you could say, look, the credences about value, the halo function ones, those don't need to get updated. Now, I think sometimes, so for example, I think Friston sometimes comes close to saying something like this. I think the plausible version is you build in a whole bunch of these. They're going to have to be pretty fine-grained conditionals about what would be valuable in what circumstances. And then we've heard about precision, so you give them all really high precision. And since precision affects how rapidly and how you update things, you build all of this in innately, you make it so that you don't update them. So it's not that they're unupdatable, it's just that it would be very hard to get any evidence that would override the high precision you put on. So, again, I think this is unattractive for a variety of reasons. First, it can't literally be that we're born with the kind of infinite, you're born with an infinite list of all of the different situations that we might encounter and what we would expect to do in each one of them. That's a lot, that's probably more than a good store. I'm going to go out and say it's definitely more than a good store. So they would have to be derived from something. Of course, if you're a Humean, the nice thing about separating beliefs and desires is you've got these kind of combinatorial resources where you can say, look, here are the things I don't like. And if I come up with a new situation, I can kind of build up, I don't like getting eaten by an alligator, which is kind of like not getting eaten by a crocodile, which is kind of like not getting eaten by a lion, and so on. It's also, again, inflexible in that if you have to build in this very large innate list, and the environment changes, you're kind of screwed. So again, if you go down this line, then you can never end up changing the value function in adaptive ways, which seems, again, false. So again, we'll get grumpy, voila. The third possibility is to give up, stop being basic. So all of this was responding that conditionalization didn't work the way you wanted it to work. I think everyone kind of does this already. So this is my kind of, takeaway lesson from a lot of talks. I pushed Jakob on this a long time ago. So already some of the stuff, so we heard a lot about how precision weighting comes in order to solve various problems. We've already got here, you're already building in a very specific set of priors in many of these cases, or you've got hyperparameters that you end up tweaking. So one thing that I should step back from not being criticized, I think one of the really interesting back and forth for me in a lot of this was sort of between Jakob and Andy on this. Andy, I think is close to my own part on this. Tukit had this view that, look, evolution does a lot of things. Evolution is going to get, the things in there that work. Versus Jakob, the sort of more like austere Bayesian formulation. But I think, in fact, even when you look at some of the stuff Jakob does, you're no longer doing a kind of strict Bayesianism. You're doing this kind of, you start with Bayes and then you add in various curly Q's and epicycles in order to make it work right. Now, that alone is unobjectionable, right? I mean, everything works like that. Lots of theories work like that. It's also that being a strict Bayesian is very hard. So talking to some people around here, I mean, the exciting thing about Bayesianism is supposed to be like whatever your priors in the long run, you end up converging on the truth, but the long run can be very long, we're all dead in the long run. So sometimes you've got to make decisions very quickly and faster and under less evidence than a strict Bayesian would let you do. So I think this is fine. But my main concern then is that this is going to, remember the thing we started with, that this was supposed to be really exciting because there was a single type of state that did all the work. But of course, if it's a single type of state in some sense, but you've got to build it up in very complicated ways, then you start, it's not clear that Occam's razor helps you anymore. And by analogy, so here's a Turing machine, right? And suppose someone said, look, I've got this awesome refutation of Humeanism. Here's my Turing machine. It's got one type of state, the machine state. whatever's going on, right? And all machine states do is, they tell you what to do when you're reading something like the square. Boom, I've made everything converge, right? So I've got one type of computational state. But of course, it's hard to get a Turing machine to do anything. Certainly to get a Turing machine, you imagine, look, the right response here, I feel like I'm channeling photos sometimes. The right response is, of course, once you build up something that's complicated enough to act like a human, what you're going to have to do is build up very complicated combinations of states and complicated interactions with the tape, such that you're eventually recapturing the direction of fit that distinguishes belief from desire. So even though you've got one type of computational primitive, as it were, that trades off with the complexity. So let me step back. So one way to put this is, there's a lot of discussion of this in computer science. There's a kind of trade-off between the number of computational primitives you have and the complexity of the machines that you build with them. So you can build very simple universal Turing machines, but it's very complicated. Or you can build universal Turing machines with very few states, but then you have to do very elaborate coding tricks. And so when predictive coding is in this kind of state, I think, that's in some sense, and I'll say, is the most defensible version. But the more complicated, the more stuff you have to build around this seemingly simple core, the conclusions would be, if it works, then it's probably at least at the expense of the very sexy bit. So that's most of what I have to say, actually. So let's put it on thought. But there's Papa Lewis. He's going to welcome you back to the fold. And I know it's been a long 3 days, so I don't feel that bad ending 20 minutes short and having a bit of discussion. So thanks to a lot of people, including the Australian Research Council for paying the bills. And it's still probably not too late to buy a book on pain and motivation from the MIT Press for your loved ones for Christmas. So thanks. I'll take questions.
So your sort of critique there at the end is that putting a lot of complicated stuff around this means that we're at the expense of the sexiness of this unification under parsimony. And I'm wondering if that's really a critique, because I feel like at the end of the day we're dealing with an organ like a computer and we're going to end up with some sort of messy theory. So do we really lose parsimony to the point that it's not as sexy for a machine that is a brain, as opposed to a machine that is a computer? Looking at a computer, you would expect it to be much more neat, but if you're looking at the brain, you would expect it to be messy. So,
right. So it's the idea that everyone's theories are going to end up messy, so it's not that bad. Yeah, I guess, two things to say. One is that I was implicitly assuming that, and this is good to make more explicit, I was assuming that you'd have to go to work to rebuild in a more complicated way what having two states gives you on the cheap. So if it's just that you have to take the predictive apparatus and use that to build back up belief, the simplest case is, if you have to use that to build back up beliefs and desires, then they work very differently. So I was thinking the original one, right? You say, look, I've got one kind of state that updates based on evidence that has variable and estimable prediction error weighting, isn't connected to motor stuff. And then I've got one that's connected to motor stuff, never updates, has a very high precision and this sort of thing. So you build in all this apparatus, and essentially you just build back in the distinction between belief and desire. Then that seems to me to be the bad case where you lose all of the advantages of your simplicity by just having to build this back in. Now, there might be any kind of intermediate on that. So I guess, it's at the expense of the very simple sexiness. It may still end up being that there's some kind of, on balance or on the whole, there's some kind of trade-off here, it's not clear. But I think probably at that point you start losing the Occam's razor argument and you start getting into the, you have to do kind of messy or something like that. Do you have a finger on that? Oh.
You're highlighting an issue that comes up a lot for science ground, which is the problem of motivation. You know, and the fact that evolutionary theory doesn't actually explain psychological motivation, because of course none of the organisms is really aware of what's propelling them. You know, the point is, you don't choose to be adapted. Not according to natural selection.
Yeah.
It just happens or it doesn't. And you can't tell whether the organism is successful in some lifetime. You can always tell how many great grandkids it has. Sort of that potential. It's not a psychological model, so there's a basic gap between the natural selection model of motivation, adaptation, which is on a sort of generational time scale, and the cognitive science approach, the individual organism computing its environment. And bring those two together is a problem. But my question is, actually a little close to your example, escaping the train. Because lots of shit gets run over by trains.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of living things get run down by trains. People do it all the time. They think they're smarter than the train, they think faster than the train. You know, whatever it is, people get hit by trains. I mean, that ads on TV to tell us not to get by trains. You know, like literally, this is not an obvious thing. And to me, that's sort of a striking example of how, like, you're right. What do you do with this novel case? Because in fact, lots of people screw up this novel case of the train coming, in spite of the obvious, you know, I mean, Joe Perry notwithstanding, you know, trains are pretty metal.
Yeah.
Like they're really metal, so you gotta be, and yet people don't get it. So to me, one of the things that's really interesting about your case is the degree to which it seems so obvious, and yet, you know, if any sort of predictive model that can't keep us out of the front of trains is, so how good is the human brain if people keep walking in front of trains?
I actually have much more getting hit by train thoughts about this, and this comes up in the other paper. So a few things. One, yeah, I mean, there was something, I think it's in Devil in the White City, there was this claim that like in 1890 Chicago, like 2 pedestrians a day got run over by trains.
2 cars in New York ran into each other in this case all the time.
Yeah.
They collide. There's only 2 cars in the city.
So one thing that's interesting, yeah, I mentioned this more on this in Facebook. I mean, some of this is like, you know, in fact, the reason why a lot of us don't get run over by trains is more like external scaffolding, right? So you put rails, you put, you know, lots of us look at signs, you teach kids not to step out in front of train tracks, that sort of thing. So that plays an important role. The other thing, which I sort of, a bit interesting, I didn't get into with the graded value question. One thing that I think, I mean, again, this is more on the kind of austere Kristen versions of this. One thing that I would find very hard is more on the free energy principle versions, but I think it's normal on this. So the formulation that I talked about said, look, you've got your expected state, and then you've got everything else. But it's sort of like the old Stoic ethics, where like, there's a great quote, it's not Cicero, it's in Cicero, where you know, it makes no difference whether you're at the bottom of the ocean or face down in the ditch with an inch of water, you'll still die. And so many of these, it looks like there's the right thing to do, and then everything else is not the right thing. But of course, actually, like, you know, there really is this sense in which if you're going to get hit by a train, at least let it only hit your leg or something like that. Yeah, so people, and so this is a slightly different thing, but you know, how you find these kind of gradients, which are important for evolution, how you get people to sort of do sort of the right thing or evaluate sort of the right thing is important. But I think that's right. The other thing is just one reason we know, so this is like kind of on the Kristen thing. Let me start, sorry, because this is something I have too many thoughts about to jam into one question. But so one thing with the Kristen thing is the question is, obviously we're not free energy maximizers because people do walk in front of trains sometimes and do all kinds of stupid things. And you know, anything that begins with hold my beer on YouTube and this sort of thing, right? So people aren't perfect at this. And I think it's an interesting question. This goes back to what the status of the more austere things like free energy principle is supposed to be. It seems like it can't be now descriptively accurate because you've got things that aren't maximized, minimizing free energy, and then they're just the dead ones. But if it's just supposed to be, you know, the principle that distinguishes the quick from the dead, then it doesn't actually seem like it's a guiding principle anymore. It just tells you what the living things have in common that differentiates them from the non-living things, but that's not an explanatory principle. So I think that's a kind of tension in the background of a lot of this, but that's a lot of getting hit by train thoughts. But I think that's a very good point. So, Andy?
Yeah, cool. So I really enjoyed that sort of.
You don't have to say that.
prediction error is calculated relative to a model always. That model doesn't have that much development for reality. It's just a model that is generally using are going to be a future like this, the model you can believe is before. That's kind of Christian illusion. I think that really pushes you away from reality. So it's error calculated relative to the model, so there's a model that can do a lot of work, and we start off with the model.
Yeah, do you want to do all of them, or do you want to do piece by piece?
Let's do it well. Don't take too long.
Okay.
Piece by piece, put you back on that now.
So I would typically be how you fix what the priors are. Your prior, the model is always going to be like, just, I'm not getting hit by a train or something like that. But yeah, but I think part of you is not being hit by a train. So, but if these things have to get built in, this is the story that people do about. But anyway, yeah, good.
There is a kind of value function here, of course. It's minimize long-term prediction. So you might kind of think it's a rather false value function. And it's provable that anything that you can specify using sort of the law that you can specify using bias, using control theory. So I don't, computationally, this story is quite good. Different ways of saying the same thing. So I think that I can't solve your life. I think you're more in the loss of these two big triggers, like the leading design. And what we've done, I think, or where I think this is going, is not to, as it were, reprogram a single thing, which is more like a lead process. I think we're replacing them with a whole bunch of things, all different kind of prediction, different kinds of prediction at different time scales. And that's going to do a much better job than the lead design of everything, economics, the real fashion psychology, and whatever. So I don't think I see your eyes as kind of where did my book psychology come?
To be fair, I think the more general way is, it seems like you need any of these. So anything we can get these two things that varying orthogonally. And it does seem like the cases. My worry about this is actually, I think that pains are very different from perceptions. Yeah.
It's not like thousand things that can vary, some of them orthogonally, some semi-orthogonally. That's most of what the effect is, I think, out of the story.
Okay, so, yeah.
Different time scales.
Right, so again, I think this gets back to the end, and I think some of this is touching on Dorian's question. So some of this is a question about how much the kind of original thing that I was reading this Clark guy is saying about, the attraction of this is that it's kind of got one very simple state type and one very simple principle. Yeah, once that goes away, I agree with it, there are ways to build in lots of prediction-y sorts of things, and then, and if it goes that way, and again, this kind of theme that I feel like maybe this is somewhere where you and Yakov are starting to diverge, that I'm more sympathetic to, and then I think that's just then we stop arguing about parsimony and we start arguing about how good a model it is or something like that. But I'll say that there, you've got a piece of paper. Oh, okay. We don't want to that.
Any more questions?
There's someone else, so you can go back to pain if you want, yeah.
Well, relating to the point you just made, is it possible that maybe prediction explanations will not be better in every context, and that we should distinguish these explanations? Because I, for example, don't see how it's going to work in legal practices.
I think you have your world in which you take beliefs and desires to name two big important problems at times, and therefore negotiate those worlds. We have to pull out behaviors into line with those sorts of notions, even if they're not really tracking the underlying machines very well. So, yes.
I mean, I actually agree with that. I'm less committed to belief and desire in folk psychology on this than I am the, different kinds of, motivational versus representation. But it is an interesting question. I guess you start getting, come back around to the campaign, you get these questions about, it's kind of a rehash of the old non-reductive physicalism arguments at this point to say, well, look, of course I've got a complicated implementation. Should I just, this is now channeling Fodor, right? But suppose the belief and desire, folk psychology, they work pretty well too. It's a very different theory about the world. It's like trying to replace economics with atoms and that sort of thing. So it may be, one possibility may be that even though this story is right, it's much more of a brain. So say you think this story is right, but it's a very brain sort of story. And you would, I think some of this, at least in the predictive coding literature, there was a lot of, ambiguity and reasonable ambiguity about whether this was supposed to be a personal level theory, a subpersonal level theory, that sort of thing. So one thing you might do is say, look, this is a really good subpersonal level theory. It's very complicated. For legal context, folk psychology works pretty well, especially because we're all kind of taught to try to justify our actions that way anyway. So you might preserve certain, practices even if you ultimately think like down below. In the same way that you might preserve this even if you think down below is all just atoms and void.
These kind of multi-level stories, it's not that did you or did you not believe so-and-so at the time that you committed the offense? It will be reasonable. On some levels, what needs to be
Right. So it's got this very much like the Dennett British Empire sort of feel to it. It probably is not going to work very well, but.
I'm sure that some of us are going for a quick pint of